اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. لتعجيل فرج صاحب الأمر والزمان ومحور عالم الإمكان الحجة ابن الحسن العسكري، صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. One of the darkest and most repressive chapters in the history of Imam, going all the way back to Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, and for the next 250 years, a quarter of a century, was the period of the reign of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, the father of the awaited savior, al-Imam al-Mehdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. Part of the reason that makes Imam al-Hasan al-Askari's period one of the most repressive and makes him one of the most oppressed imams is the fact that his imamah was so short-lived. He himself was very young when he became imam at the age of 22, and his imamah lasted less than 6 years. Some have said 5 years and 8 months. That is all the time the Imam had before he was eventually murdered and assassinated through poisoning at the tender age of 28. And that in itself tells you almost all you need to know about what the Imam had to endure: the oppression, the persecution, the overall vibe of the epic and the time of the Imam. And not only that, but for him to spend the bulk of his life, the majority of his blessed years, as short as they were, under effectively a house arrest. Not only was it spent under house arrest, but as if confining the Imam to his own home was not sufficient for the repressive rulers of his day, his home was placed inside a military camp. Now, if you ever seen a military camp of any kind, you'll know that the number one priority is security. No one gets in or out without explicit permission, without being screened, without being monitored, without their identity being checked over and over again. By definition and by nature, that is what a military camp is. Samarra just happened to be not only the capital city where the rulers of Bani al-Abbas chose to have as their base, but also it was a military complex, a fortress of sorts, where different armies would converge and rendezvous. And so because of these two reasons, the militarized nature of the city, but also the presence of the Khalifa and the Khulafa, it made Samarra all the more difficult to live in. And if you could call it that, if you could call it life, it was life in a military fortress and under those kinds of circumstances. Every move of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari was being monitored. Every single person that he came in contact with, he could not have any meetings with anyone. He might have had the ability to meet people, come in contact with others, perhaps grocers and merchants, and at the end of the day, this being a city, it also had some civilians who inhabited the town. But if anyone came into contact with the Imam, he was being closely monitored and watched. So much so, in fact, that they planted spies in the house of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. Again, this is all to illustrate the extreme circumstances of the life of this blessed young Imam alayhi afdalus salati wassalam. And not only was he placed under house arrest in a military fortress, but as an additional layer of extreme inconvenience and torture, every now and then Imam al-Askari would also be imprisoned. He would be summoned and eventually sent to prison. And while imprisoned, some reports say that there would be spies dispatched to the prison so that they would watch what the Imam says and report back to their superiors, and even report on who the Imam meets in terms of other inmates whilst being in prison. In fact, one of the people who was imprisoned with the Imam for that sole purpose was Ja'far ibn Ali al-Hadi. In other words, Imam al-Hasan al-Askari's own brother, who according to the majority corpus of Shia tradition was aligned with the Abbasid Khulafa of the day and was working with them to undermine Imam al-Hasan al-Askari's imama and authority and credibility, because he wanted the position of imama to be awarded to him as opposed to his brother, leading some to give him the title, the very defamatory title of Ja'far al-Kadhab. Some scholars have disputed these reports and have said that what Ja'far was doing, while it appeared to undermine the authority of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, it was in fact being done in coordination with Imam al-Askari. But it appears, when you look at the traditions and try and take an overall picture of Ja'far and his credibility and his credentials, it's quite a negative picture that you end up painting. Even though he was the son of an infallible Imam, he was the brother of an infallible Imam. But I think the overwhelming evidence is tipped in favor of him being a traitor rather than someone working with Imam al-Askari in order to advance his goals and the aims and objectives of the Imam. And in fact, after the martyrdom of Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam, Ja'far presents himself as the heir and as the successor to the Imam, as the 12th Imam essentially. And some reports say that after the passing of the Imam, he came and he told everyone, look, I'm your Imam now. You report to me if there is any alms, if there is any financial contributions in the form of khums and zakat and whatnot, you are supposed to give it to me and no one else. And this actually went on for a while until the Shia, in particular those of them who were shrewd and smart and were able to look beyond the facade of faux religiosity and were willing to investigate further and ask some hard-hitting questions, those Shia were able to quickly arrive at the inevitable conclusion that Ja'far was not the 12th Imam, but rather it was someone else. For instance, one report says that a group of Shias came and they had with them quite a large sum of money in the form of huquq shar'iyya, meaning khums and zakat and whatnot, as well as a lot of letters that were addressed to the Imam. And those letters contained questions. As you would write to your marja' today, you would send an istifta. Shia living in the time of the infallible Imams, the inerrant Imams, they would send these questions directly to the Imam. And so they came to Samarra looking for Imam Al-Hasan Al-Askari alayhi salam, only to be told that the Imam had been killed and had passed away. And so they were taken to Ja'far's house, whereupon Ja'far said that I am the successor to your Imam, give me what you have. And so they told him, sure, you're the next Imam. We're not going to dispute that. We're not going to pass any judgment. We'll take your word at its face value. However, we have this tradition, as we've been taught by our Imams, that if someone claims to be God's representative and emissary, it's easy to make that claim, right? If someone claims to be able to drive, what do you tell them? You tell them, well, here's a car. Sit in the driver's seat and show us how you can drive. If someone claims that they can speak Japanese, you tell them, well, how about you say something in Japanese and I'll find out whether you're telling the truth or not. When someone claims to represent God on earth, then you're supposed to ask them some questions. You can't just take that claim at face value just because you saw something about it in a dream, which is a problem that we're going through in this day and age. The number of claimants to divine authority is increasing by the day. Almost every other Tuesday, we have some random loser who claims to either represent Imam al-Zaman or to be the son of Imam al-Zaman or to be the sister of Imam al-Zaman and so on and so forth. And before you know it, they've amassed a following globally. They even have followers right here in Sydney. They have followers in the Gulf states. They have followers in Europe. They have followers in some countries where they've actually set up institutions. They've set up a mosque and a Husayniyya, and they have regular programs, and they have summer camps, and they have these sorts of things because some random guy posted a tweet or a Facebook post claiming that he's the representative of the Imam and he's here to prepare and pave the way for the Imam's return. You're supposed to ask some questions. Just because he's able to make you see something about that in a dream or act like a fortune teller and tell you something, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this guy is able to do miracles. That's not how it works. If you're going to ask for a miracle, then make it count. Ask them, as one of the Shia during the lesser occultation said, okay, you claim to represent the Imam. The Imam can perform miracles just like the Prophet. I have a gray beard. How about you deduct 20 years off of my age and turn my gray beard into black the way it used to be when I was much younger. And so let's not give in too easily to claimants of imamah or claimants of sifara, as it's called. People who claim to represent the imams. It's not simple. It's not a matter of, I can make you see things. I can have you see visions, for example. Magicians and sorcerers can do that. These people actually go to places like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and China and whatnot, and they learn a few tricks, and they're able to make you see certain things, and all of a sudden you're following them, you're giving them the reins to your religion. Anyway, so Ja'far said, I am the imam. They said, sure. Except that we've been taught by previous imams that if someone new comes to the scene and claims to be an emissary of God, we're supposed to ask some questions. He says, shoot, whatever you want. They told him, fine. We'll give you the money and the letters as soon as you tell us how much money we have in our possession and who the letters are from. Because that's how the imams would often prove their authority, by telling us things that ordinarily would not be known by people. So the hadith says that Ja'far got up, he started shaking his robe and saying, يُرِيدُونَ مِنَّا أَن نَعْلَمَ الْغَيْبِ. They want us to know, to have knowledge of the unseen. And so of course they walked out knowing that this man was an imposter and a liar. So anyway, I'll mention the rest of the hadith. Someone else then approached this group and said to them, you have 1,000 dinars, 10 of those coins have been wiped, so you can't see the engraving on the coins anymore. As for the letters, they've been sent by X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. He laid it down before them, told them exactly what they wanted to know. And so they said, whoever sent you is the imam. We don't care after this. The one who sent you to us with that information must be the imam and no one else. So they handed everything that was entrusted to them over to that khadim. So that man, Ja'far, the hadith says, was so upset by this, the fact that he was exposed as an imposter, that he then rushed to the Khalifa of the day. Remember, this is after the passing of Imam Hassan Al-Askari alayhi salam. He went to the Khalifa and he complained to him. And he said to him two things. The first thing was, I want you to make me the Imam of the Shia. Ja'far said that to the Khalifa, the Abbasid Khalifa. He said, make me the Imam of the Shia. The Khalifa said to him, you imbecile. If I could make you the Imam of the Shia, I'd make me the Imam of the Shia. Our whole war with the members of this household is over Imamah. It's over the unconditional love that people have towards these Imams that we can never acquire. Everything we do, all the money that we spend, never buys us any real respect. It never buys us love. It never buys us this unconditional loyalty that we see in the followers of Al-Hassan Al-Askari and his household and his ancestors and his son. Whatever we've done has been in an attempt to acquire the imamah that they have. And you're asking me to hand over the imamah to you. Everything we've been doing to their followers, all the persecution, all the bloodshed, all the murder, all the killing, all the torture, all the imprisonment, none of it has produced any results as far as detaching this community of devotees from their imam. And you, idiot, are asking me to give you imamah as if this is some position that I get to bestow upon someone else? So then Ja'far said to him, then if you're not going to do that, then I would like you to throw the family of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari in prison. And so the hadith says he went after the mother of Imam al-Zaman, who was still alive, and he threw her in prison, and eventually she died in his custody. So imagine, you have someone who's the brother of an infallible Imam, the son of an infallible line of Imams, who acts in this way. Treasonous to the core. Filthy in his lack of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Absolutely immoral. Earning him the title of Ja'far al-Kadhab. So and this man was then sent to prison with Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, thinking that obviously he's the brother of the Imam. If the Imam is going to confide to anyone whilst in prison, it'll be his brother. And so the hope was that they would extract information from Imam al-Askari, as hard as that was, but the idea was to extract information from him, and I'll get to that later on, inshallah. Specifically, what kind of information. And so this was the kind of era that the Imam had to endure, which was so painful and so repressive, while at the same time being so confusing for so many people. As I explained earlier, when you have the brother of an inerrant Imam claiming to be his successor, what is a normal person supposed to do in these circumstances? It's really confusing seeing this dichotomy between, on the one hand, God's representative on earth, and on the other hand, his own brother who sits at the opposite end of the spectrum. And then the successor happens to be this child who is hidden from plain sight. It's such a confusing time, which the first point to be mentioned here is there's a hadith from Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam, in which the Imam says that my time is the most turbulent and most confusing time of all. So that 6-year period of the Imam ascending the throne of Imamah and eventually being killed 5 years and 8 months later was the most difficult, according to Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. In some ways, this day and age is much more, in terms of clarity, in terms of access to knowledge and information, in terms of at least the ability in principle to know what the truth is much easier today. In many ways, you don't have to struggle with the notion of who is the legitimate Imam. Is it Imam al-Mehdi salawatullahi alayhi, or is it Ja'far al-Kadhab? Whereas back then, this was a legitimate and a real grievance. This was something that people had to deal with. The same thing the Shias went through after the martyrdom of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and we have narrations about some of the most senior companions of the Imam being completely confused about how they're supposed to follow the leadership of a child at the age of 7 or 9, Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. If you think about it in this day and age, while there are so many challenges, there are so many problems that we have to struggle with, but many of these sources of confusion, these points of contention have been long settled. Alhamdulillah. Thanks to the sacrifices of the Imams, first and foremost, and also the hard labor and sacrifices of our scholars and ulama and maraja over the years and the decades and the centuries. And so part of the reason why it was so repressive is because the rulers were getting increasingly desperate. They were becoming more and more pathologically paranoid at the notion that the time is running out. You see, just as the Shia knew or had a rough idea of the timeline of Imamah, they had a rough idea of how many Imams there were going to be, that they're all going to be from Quraysh, they're all going to be children of Imam al-Hussein, and so on and so forth. All these details were available to the majority of Shia. But just as that information was made available to the Shia, it was also made available to their opponents. And so the other side was also counting down the minutes to the 12th Imam, meaning the Imam who was going to bring an end to oppression and restore justice and fill the earth with equity, as the Prophet ﷺ was quoted as saying over and over again. This hadith about the Imam of the time, about the last Imam, the 12th Imam, bringing about justice and ending oppression and injustice, was well known. So much so that belief in the 12th Imam is not exclusive to the Shia faith. There is in fact a book called Al-Aqidatu bil-Mehdi, or something along those lines. Aqidatun sunniyatun la shi'iyya. This is a Sunni belief, not a Shia belief. And if you recall, during the celebration of Eid al-Ghadir, I mentioned something specifically about this idea that we share quite a lot with the other Muslim schools of thought, right? The Sunnis, they claim to believe in the 12th Imam. They claim to believe in someone who's going to restore justice. They also claim that specifically what I mentioned was their claim to believing in Ghadir, and how they say that Ghadir was misunderstood by the Shia. The Shia say that it was an appointment of the Prophet to Amir al-Mu'mineen, making him his heir and making him his successor, whereas we believe, they claim, that it was a matter of establishing the position of Amir al-Mu'mineen and making him, saying that the Prophet loves him and whatnot. And my point was at the time, and I'll reiterate this point again, and if you're ever having any conversations with people from the other schools of thought, this would be a good and a valid point to raise. If that is the case, if you believe in the broad concept of Ghadir, whatever the interpretation is, if you believe in the broad concept of Imam al-Mahdi, whatever your interpretation is, right? Then why is it that these aspects of your belief have been completely carved out of your belief system? Why is it that that's something that you never talk about, you never bring up? Only because the Shia make a big deal out of them, and they are a big deal, all of a sudden you're willing to step over your own beliefs, your own articles of faith, just because the Shia. I mean, imagine if the Jewish community or the Christians or the Buddhists started to commemorate the death of Imam al-Hussein, the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. We would be out of our minds if we said, well, the Jews are celebrating it now, so you know what? This is a Jewish thing, so let's not commemorate anymore. No one even thinks that way. When it comes to believing in the 12th Imam, if the Sunnis claim that that is part of their articles of faith, then let's talk about it. Moving on. The rulers knew, just as everybody else knew, that the 12th Imam was coming. And so they began to close in on the Imams. Part of the reason why that era was so repressive and so dark is because they were starting to become desperate and paranoid. Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, in fact, let me mention this hadith. He answers the question that I posed about the enmity of Bani al-Abbas towards the Ahlul Bayt. And he actually speaks more broadly. He says, قد وضع بنو أمية وبنو العباس سيوفهم علينا. Bani Umayyah and Bani al-Abbas waged war and unsheathed their swords against us for two reasons. لعلتين. إحداهما أنهم كانوا يعلمون أنه ليس لهم في الخلافة حق. First of all, Because when you're an oppressor, you start seeing everybody else through the barrel of the gun. When you have stolen something from someone, then the person you've stolen from becomes your number one enemy. Because you're always paranoid that this person will come back claiming his right. And so you'll make sure that that never happens. The Imam then says, so first of all, because they knew they had taken what was ours, and so they tried to eliminate us physically so that we would never claim our right. And number two, وَثَانِيهُمَا أَنَّهُمْ قَدْ وَقَفُوا مِنَ الْأَخْبَارِ الْمُتَوَاتِرَةِ. Because you think these people don't know what's going on? You think our enemies aren't spending every waking minute of their time not only scrutinizing our actions and evaluating and analyzing what we do and looking at our leadership and looking at the Martyrdom and trying to sow seeds of discord and whatnot. Not only that, but they would try everything they have to anticipate our moves, to try and figure out what it is that's moving us, what it is that's pushing us in a specific direction, and specifically looking at the question of Imam al-Zaman. Now, of course, if, let's say, the intelligence apparatus of an enemy nation doesn't believe in God, right? They won't believe that the Imam is able to miraculously live for over 1,000 years. Of course, they're not going to believe that. If they believed in God and they believed in miracles, then we wouldn't having these debates and these discussions. But they will look at the concept and the idea that someone someday will claim to be the 12th Imam. Now, whether this person's been alive since the time of Imam Al-Askari or not is irrelevant. In other words, they look at our beliefs as social constructs, and that is good enough for them to do everything in their power to prevent this phenomenon, to prevent the idea of Imam al-Mehdi coming about. So whether it's a social construct, whether it's a superstition, or whatever way they characterize it is irrelevant. What is relevant is that they're watching for it. They're waiting for it. They're anticipating someone coming and saying he is the 12th Imam. And that's a very important point to keep in mind. Why? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Man nama lam yunam an. You may be asleep. You may be negligent toward your living Imam. You meaning I. I may be dismissive of the needs and the obligations of this 12th Imam, which we are, which I am. But the enemy isn't. The enemy thinks more about the Imam than I do. And that is a depressing thought, brothers and sisters. Man nama lam yunam an. You may be asleep, but if you have an enemy, the enemy is not asleep. The enemy is spending every time they have available to them to scheme and plot against you in order to undermine you and in order to bring about your destruction. Man nama lam yunam an. So the Imam says, قد وقفوا من الأخبار المتواترة على أن زوال ملك الجبابرة والظلمة على يد الإمام. And he mentions his specific title. He says they know, they have seen narrations, prophecies, call them if you will, about how the end of their reign will come about at the hand of the 12th Imam. And knowing this, فسعوا في قتل أهل بيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. They did everything in their power to kill and to destroy the family of Rasulullah. وَإِبَادَةِ نَسْلِهِ. And to eliminate and wipe out the lineage of Rasulullah. Because they knew that the Imam will be from his lineage. فَأَبَى اللَّهُ أَنْ يَكْشِفَ أَمْرَهُ لِوَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمْ. But God refused to reveal the 12th Imam to any of those tyrants. إِلَّا أَنْ يُتِمَّ نُورَهُ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. And God refuses, and he quotes the verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refuses to let them achieve their objective, but he has sworn to reveal his light even if the disbelievers hate to see so. The hadith then says, وَحِينَ وُلِدَ الْمَهْدِي صَلَوَاتُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. When the Imam was born, Imam al-Mehdi, Imam al-Hasan al-Askari said such. He said, زَعَمَتِ الظَّلَمَةُ أَنَّهُمْ يَقْتُلُونَنِي. The tyrants have claimed that by killing me, they're going to end this prophecy from being fulfilled. لِيَقْطَعُوا هَذَا النَّسْلِ. To sever this lineage. كَيْفَ رَأَوْا قُدْرَةَ الْقَادِرِ. Let them now see how Allah, the all-powerful, omnipotent Lord of the worlds, is able to do what He wishes. You know, in English there's an expression where they say, so close and yet so far. Have you heard that before? It's amazing how, if you look at the history of Islam, the history of the Ahlul Bayt, all the way from Rasulullah down to Imam al-Mahdi, how the enemy were so close yet so far. Take one example, the example of Karbala. They were so close to ending this legacy of prophethood, to ending and forever bringing about the end of all apostles and all the messages of prophets and messengers forever on the afternoon of Ashura. They were so close to the point that traditions tell us that in Medina there were only 4 households that had any form of allegiance towards the Ahlul Bayt. In other words, 4 households that were Shia, right? Even the lineage of Rasulullah became almost extinct in Karbala. The lineage of Aqil, the brother of Amir al-Mu'mineen, became extinct in Karbala. None of them lived. Even the girls were killed. Hamida bint Muslim was killed in Karbala. The one Imam al-Hussein took in and wiped her head, and you know the story, right? Even the little girls were killed. They were so close and yet so far. Imam Zayn al-Abidin survived. Imam al-Baqir survived. And then there was a revival of the message of Rasulullah, the message of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And it went on and gained strength and traction and got bigger and bigger until the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Baqara al-ilma baqra. Opened the floodgates of divine knowledge. And then Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam followed suit. And then Imam al-Ridha became the one through whom knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt became evident, not only to the Muslims but also the non-Muslims, the disbelievers, the Jews, the Christians, the Sabians, to the point that he was given the title of Al-Alimu min Ali Muhammad salawatullahi alayhi wa Allahumma sallallahu. The point is, they were so close and yet so far. And the reason that pivot happens, the reason this plateau takes place, the reason they get so close and yet are sprung away as far as possible, that is God's action. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stepping in, making sure, as the verse in the Quran says, يَأْبَى إِلَّا أَن يُتِمَّ نُورَهُ. And this is one way of Allah demonstrating the fact that He's the one pivoting the future of this world. He is the one stepping in. It is because of His intervention that the enemy gets so close and yet they're able to achieve absolutely nothing. And so perhaps this is what Imam al-Hasan al-Askari is referring to when he says they tried. They tried so hard, in fact, that Imam al-Hasan al-Askari only gets to become an imam for 5 years and 8 months. And by the way, the 5 years and 8 months would have been a lot shorter had it not been for the extreme instability on the other side. So the other side, the Khulafa of Bani al-Abbas, Imam al-Hasan al-Askari lived through 5 of them. During his imamah, he lived through 3 of them. And those 3 were they had so many problems amongst themselves. There would be assassinations and there would be coups and there would be all kinds of mischief. So the only reason Imam al-Hasan al-Askari was able to be an imam for that very short period of time, less than 6 years, was because of the political instability on the other side. Otherwise it would have been a lot shorter. And that's the kind of circumstances that the imam had to live through And yet, he was able to fulfill his mission. He was able to establish a moral code for the time of the occultation. He was able to establish a clandestine, secret system of communication between the Imam and his representatives. One person says, and I'll wrap up, he was in charge. Again, this is what the Imam had to go through. He had no contact with anybody in the outside world, except people who worked in his inner circle, if you like, in his close vicinity. For example, the guy in charge of lighting up the fire to warm up the water of the communal bathroom. So just some random worker. He was recruited by the Imam, and he obviously had become a Shia and a loyal servant of the Imam. One day he says that the Imam gave me a cane, a walking stick. And he said, take the stick and give it to so-and-so. He said, I thought to myself, why would the Imam send a stick? Maybe it's a blessing, right? Maybe that guy has a broken leg and the Imam wants to help out. So he goes to give the stick to the person he was meant to give it to. Along the way, he says, I came across someone pulling an animal of some sort, perhaps a cow. And because the alleyways and the roads were narrow, the cow had blocked access and he couldn't go through it. So he says, I started asking the guy holding the reins of the cow to just move, and the cow was stuck and he couldn't do it. So I came and I used the stick to hit the cow. As soon as I hit the cow, the stick broke. When it broke, suddenly small pieces of paper with messages written on them fell apart on the ground. And I realized that the Imam was using the stick as a means of communicating with the outside world. So I quickly gathered all these pieces of paper, all these messages, put them back inside the stick, and ran off and gave it to the other person. This is what the Imam had to go through. Imagine. Inability to speak and to communicate with people, to the point where one hadith says, two people came to Samarra. One of them had some doubts about the imamah of Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam. He said, I want a sign. I want the Imam to give me something, to show me something, if he truly is the Imam. And he happened to be one of the descendants of Abu Dharr. So he was a Ghifari, meaning he was from the tribe of Ghifar. He came along with another person by the name of Halabi. He says, when we went there, the Imam sent us a message through a proxy, and la tusallimu alayhi. If you see me, and by the way, the Shia would go in the hope of catching a glimpse of the Imam, in the hope of just being able to see him walk past them. As for an audience, that was almost unheard of. So the Imam sent them a message saying, la tusallimu alayhi. If you see me walking past you, do not even say salam to me. وَلَا تُشِيرُوا إِلَيْهِ وَلَا تُومِئُوا إِلَيْهِ. Tushiru means don't point to me. Ima means when you use other than your hands to point to something, meaning you use your head or your eyes or something. The Imam said, don't even do that. فَإِنِّي لَا أَأْمَنُ عَلَيْكُمْ. Because I'm afraid for your safety. If you even point to me, if you acknowledge knowing me in any way, that could have you killed. Anyway, so eventually, after a while, they were able to see the Imam. But the encounter was very brief. It was in the form of them standing in the marketplace. The Imam was riding on the back of a mule or a camel. And as he walked past, the Imam looked at the Ghifari, that young man who said, I'm looking for a sign, I'm looking for some proof of his imamah. He looked at him, and as though he was having a casual conversation with him, he said to him, Anta Ghifariyun? Are you from the tribe of Ghifar? He said, yes. So the Imam said to him, how is your mother? And he mentioned her name. His father had passed away. He said, how is your mother doing? He said, she's well. So then the Imam walked. He went away. So that man, Al-Halabi, said, I looked at my friend. I said to him, have you ever seen this man who just spoke to you? He said, no, I've never seen him in my life. He said, that is Imam Al-Hasan Al-Askari. Did he know that you're a Ghifari? He said, no. He said, does he know your family? How does he know your mother's first name? Are you satisfied now? Are you now content with this, with the proof that the Imam is telling you things that he would not ordinarily be privy to? Are you happy? He said, yes, I would have been happy with much less than that. All I wanted was a sign. Alhamdulillah, now I have it. And so the very short life of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari came to an end on the morning of the 9th of Rabi'ul Awwal at the hand of the Khalifa of the day who poisoned the Imam to death. The circumstances surrounding the poisoning, there are details there which I won't have time to mention, but I will mention this. Toward the end of his blessed life, the Imam said to a man who was a servant in his house, he said to him, give me a drink that the doctors had prescribed. So he said, I brought him a cup filled with that drink. The Imam tried to drink it, but because of the weakness, the extreme weakness. In fact, I was speaking to a doctor recently based in the United States, and he said to me, he said, you know, I've done some research about the types of poison that was administered to the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. He said, you know, it takes a really powerful poison to cause massive internal bleeding to the point where the internal organs would come apart and they would have to vomit pieces and parts of their flesh. He says, we do have these kinds of poisons now, but it takes a very powerful, very potent poison to do this. And those were the kinds of poisons that were administered to our Imams, brothers and sisters. So the man says that I gave the Imam the cup, he tried to drink, but because of the extreme weakness, the cup was shivering in his hand and it started hitting his teeth. He couldn't drink it. So then he said to me, go into that room, you will see a young boy. Ask him to come to his father. Imam al-Mahdi, remember, was in hiding. People they didn't have access to him. He says, I went into the room and I saw a young boy with a face that resembled the moon. He was prostrating toward the Qibla with his index finger held up, and he was praying for his father. So I said to him, Mawlai, Sayyidi, your father is asking for you. So he got up and he went into the room. He embraced his father, Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam. So the Imam said to him, give me a drink of water, my son. Ya Sayyid Ahli Baytih, O master of his family. The Imam is clearly appointing him, saying, you are my heir and successor. He said, give me a drink of water. So Imam al-Zaman brought him a drink of water. He drank it and they embraced until the Imam passed away. I say, Ya Mawlai, Ya Sayyidi, Ya Aba Muhammad, Ya Hasan al-Askari, you were thirsty at the point of your death. And while you were surrounded by spies and enemies, while they claimed that you died a natural death, and that no one should claim you were martyred, while they oppressed you for all those years. But at the time of your death, when you were thirsty, you called for your son and he came and he gave you a drink of water so you wouldn't die whilst thirsty. Alhamdulillah, this is how you left this world. لكن لا يوم كيومك يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. What happened to your grandfather, Abu Abdullah, on the day of Ashura, when he called out, وَحَقِّ جَدِّي إِنِّي عَطْشَانٍ, I swear by my grandfather Rasulullah, I am thirsty. And yet there was no one there to give him water. No one answered his call except the enemy, who rejoiced and clapped and laughed as they left Abu Abdullah to die of thirst. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اشف صدر الحجة. اللهم بحق الحجة اشف صدر الحجة بظهور الحجة. اللهم اجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه وشيعته ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم رد كيد أعدائنا إلى نحورهم. اللهم احفظ علماءنا مراجعنا